It was the year 1970 when a fisherman called Joe Robitaille was traveling off the coast of Florida. He had gone deep sea fishing with his buddies when suddenly a huge storm appeared out of nowhere. It came crashing down on the group, causing their boat to capsize. The men were all thrown into the raging waters of the ocean. Luckily, the water wasn't too deep, so none of them were seriously injured when they hit the surface. However, their vessel was damaged beyond repair, and now they were stranded in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean without any food or water. As soon as the men realized that there was no land anywhere around them, they started to panic. They were wearing lifebuoys and desperately trying to signal for help, but it seemed like no one was coming to save them. After a while, Joe spotted something in the distance. At first he thought it was an illusion caused by the sun setting over the horizon, but then he realized it was a small island. The men swam towards it, and thankfully it wasn't too far away. Soon they were able to climb out onto the sand and collapse on the beach, thanking God that they had been saved. However, their joy was short-lived because when they looked around, they realized they were completely alone. They searched the beach to see if there was anyone else from their fishing group, but they couldn't find them anywhere. They decided to stick together and wait for some passing ships to come along and rescue them. But sadly, no boats passed by for days. The men spent their time building fires and collecting coconuts to eat. Even though they had no way of knowing how long they had been there, they knew they had to keep themselves busy to avoid going insane. Joe noticed that the island was covered in lush green vegetation. And even though there weren't many trees, there was plenty of bush and foliage. Because they didn't know how long they would be stuck there, they tried to make their temporary homes as comfortable as possible. They made huts out of palm wood and leaves and used vines and creepers to hang up their clothes to dry. They also gathered seashells and pebbles and arranged them in patterns on the ground, which gave them a sense of familiarity and comfort. Joe also noticed that the beach was surrounded by tall cliffs, so the island wasn't very big. He knew that if they climbed to the top, they might be able to spot a boat on the horizon and increase their chances of being rescued. Sure enough, after climbing to the top of the cliffs, they were able to see much further into the ocean. They took turns keeping watch, so someone was always scanning the surface of the ocean. Luckily for the men, after 5 long days, they were finally spotted, and a helicopter came to rescue them. But there was one strange thing about the helicopter. It wasn't a Coast Guard helicopter. It was a military helicopter. The men explained to the soldiers that they had been lost at sea for days, and that was the only reason they had survived was because they had found the island. The soldiers were grateful that the men had been rescued, but they were even more curious about the island. They wanted to take the men back to the mainland so they could tell everyone about their amazing discovery. However, when they returned to the island, it had vanished. It was like it had never been there at all. The soldiers searched the waters for any sign of land, but nothing appeared on the radar. Joe and the other men were distraught because they had made the island their home, and they were worried that no one would believe their story if they didn't have any proof that it existed. To make matters worse, the Coast Guard couldn't find any record of the men being lost at sea. This meant that no one believed their story and they were labeled as liars. However, Joe knew that he wasn't lying and he refused to give up hope. He continued to insist that the island was real and that it had saved their lives. As the years went by, the men aged and moved on with their lives. They tried to forget about the island and the ordeal they had been through, but sometimes they would think back to those terrifying days and wonder what would have happened if they hadn't been rescued. Joe never forgot about the island and he continued to search for it for the rest of his life. He even wrote books and articles about his experience in the hopes that someone could help him find the island. Even though Joe never found the island, his story inspired many people. Some people believed his story and thought that the island was real, while others thought that it was just a figment of his imagination. However, there are many theories as to why the island may have disappeared. Some believe that the island was actually a mirage. A mirage is an optical illusion that can occur when light is reflected off of a surface, such as a pool of water. Mirages can be caused by a variety of factors, including temperature inversions and the curvature of the Earth. In this case, it's possible that the men saw a mirage of an island that didn't actually exist. This could explain why the island vanished when the military returned to find it. Others believe that the island was a real piece of land that was simply underwater. It's not uncommon for islands to emerge and disappear underwater. This is usually caused by changes in sea level or tectonic activity. It's possible that the island was only above water during the storm, which would explain why it vanished after the weather calmed down. However, there are some who believe that the island is still there, hidden beneath the waves. They believe that the military was able to find the island, but they kept its location a secret for some reason. There is no evidence to support this theory, but it's an interesting idea nonetheless. What do you think? Do you think the island was real, or was it just a mirage? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Now let's move on to the next strange mystery. Plane crashes are scary events that can be caused by a number of factors, such as bad weather, mechanical problems, or pilot error. However, there are some cases where the cause of the crash is never determined. One such case was the crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 935, which occurred in the Florida Everglades in 1972. The plane was flying from New York to Miami when it crashed. All 6 people on board were killed. Investigators were unable to determine the cause of the crash, which led to many conspiracy theories. One of the most popular theories is that the plane was shot down by a missile. This theory is supported by the fact that the plane was flying over a military testing range when it crashed. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. Another theory is that the plane was hijacked. This theory is supported by the fact that the plane was carrying a large amount of cash, which may have been the target of the hijackers. However, there is no evidence to support this theory either. In the end, the cause of the crash was never determined, and the case remains open. This has led to many unanswered questions and speculation. What really happened to Eastern Airlines Flight 935? Was it a mechanical failure, pilot error, bad weather, or something else entirely? Or was it something more sinister, such as foul play or a government cover-up? Unfortunately, we may never know the answers to these questions. If you like this unsolved mystery, stay tuned for more.